France have been talking about it in the news, talking about it in business as well. Big changes at the finance ministry, aren't there?
Yeah, before this reshuffle, there were 7 ministers under the finance umbrella in France. Now there are only 2 after this reshuffle. Michel Sapin has taken over as finance minister, while the sometimes controversial Arnaud Montebourg has been promoted. He remains the minister for industrial renewal, but adds the economy and digital development to his portfolio. Now, as the minister charged with saving France's struggling industry, he's clashed with big business in the past, including on one occasion threatening to nationalise a steelworks to prevent its closure. Now, he's seen as a staunch defender of protectionist policies, so could a more powerful Arnaud Montebourg scare off investors from France? That's what we asked Antonio Barroso from the consulting firm Teneo Intelligence.
I think it's a little bit surprising for investors given the well-known stance of Montebourg, negative stance, I would say, towards foreign companies and his criticism towards Brussels. I still think it's not going to be an issue. I think from the point of view of coordination, obviously the cacophony between the finance minister, Michel Sapin, the new finance minister, and Montebourg could be a problem. But at the end of the day, I think that Manuel Valls is going to be the one calling the shots. And that will probably fix the coordination issues between the 2 new finance minister and economy minister.
Now to Frankfurt next, where officials at the European Central Bank will have some tough decisions to make later. One specific warning for them came from the International Monetary Fund on Wednesday. Christine Lagarde called on the ECB to take action to stop the spectre of falling prices, known as deflation. She wants Mario Draghi to begin pumping money into the Eurozone in the same way as the Federal Reserve in the United States. Let's take a listen.
The policies are the same, no variation, no change, no innovation, no breakthrough. We will be in that sort of low, medium-term growth, which could turn into a trap, as I've mentioned.
Christine Lagarde there. Now we're going to go to Germany next. The Cabinet there approving a bill to bring in a minimum wage.
Yeah, the £8.50 an hour rate will apply to all industries from next year. That, of course, if it's approved by the Bundestag, which will vote on it in July of this year. But it was a key part of Angela Merkel's programme for government with her coalition partners. That's despite fears that it could raise Germany's already very low cost of labour. William Hildebrandt has more.
A dramatic policy change in Europe's biggest economy. The German cabinet approved the country's first ever minimum wage at €8.50 per hour. Officials expect it to affect nearly 4 million people when it goes into force next year.
My husband and I work. We have 3 kids. I don't think the minimum wage would be enough to get by.
Though some workers who weren't represented by powerful unions call the change a blessing. Hairdressers at this Berlin salon currently make a maximum €7 an hour.
Yes. For everyone who's like me and gets less than $8.50 an hour, we're happy. It's a small victory.
But some businesses are concerned. This asparagus producer counts on cheap labor to keep costs down.
With this new expense, we're worried we'll no longer be able to operate with a profit.
The overwhelming majority of Germans are in favor of the change, and they're not alone. Germany was one of just 7 countries in the 28-member EU without a minimum wage. And at nearly €1,300 a month, it would place Germany above the UK, but behind neighbours Belgium and France. But critics say the cost is too high. 10% of companies have threatened to make job cuts, and some worry businesses could leave Germany, seeking cheap labour elsewhere.
Yeah, so is that affecting the markets at all then, Stephen?
Well, actually, we're going to start with just a look at how things are happening on the Asian markets. We've got after the highs on Wall Street that we saw in trading on Wednesday, that helped most of the Asian markets into positive territory. The Nikkei up over 1% as the value of the yen has been falling. We had some stimulus measures announced by the Chinese government, which we'd expect them to move the markets a little bit more, actually. Shanghai still dipping into the red despite news the government is going to spend up to an extra $25 billion on railway construction. This as it tries to maintain its growth targets of around around 7.5%.
Now, you've got to concentrate for the next story. It's quite complicated. It's quite funny as well, though. The US sanctions on a Russian businessman could have a knock-on effect for music fans. This is in Finland. Explain it to us.
So you may remember the sanctions that were imposed by the United States on over the Ukraine crisis on Russian the individuals, 27 of them, in fact, businessmen and officials that were targeted with measures like asset freezes and visa bans. Well, one of them is a man called Gennady Timchenko, who owns 50% of the Heart Wall Arena in Helsinki. And this is where things get a little bit complicated, because there are two concerts booked to take place there by an American producer called Live Nation. One of them is Miley Cyrus, you can see there. The other is Justin Timberlake.
Yeah.
The Financial Times says that the wording of the sanctions could mean that, in fact, those concerts may not be able to go ahead, because Live Nation, as an American company, could be banned from doing business with Timchenko under the sanctions. Now, this all hinges on whether or not Live Nation has any money left to pay for the venue to see whether or not that may be affected. But a bit of a surprise knock-on effect, maybe a wrecking ball, we might call it.
A wrecking ball.
Miley Cyrus fans.
I'm very impressed that you managed to get the phrase wrecking ball, Miley Cyrus and sanctions
but
into
no
the
twerking.
same story.
I feel disappointed in myself that I haven't managed to bring in twerking.
I'm sure he'll manage it, perhaps next week. Stephen, thank you very much. More complicated, but also slightly funny stories in the French newspapers with Flo. This is about government reshuffles. It is slightly bizarre as well, isn't it?
That's
really?
right, and it's pretty incredible because for once the left-wing press and the right-wing press agree with the fact that they're not very happy about this reshuffle. Let's start with Le Figaro, the right-leaning paper, which says that Hollande reshuffles, but it really doesn't change anything. Only one of 16 ministers in this, quote, new and tighter government are actually new. The rest were part of the previous team. So we just got a quick little peek there at the editorial. Le Figaro says this new team is incoherent and fragile. Fragile because there's no longer the support of the Green Party, but Le Figaro is quite happy